This meeting of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee to order. And we always acknowledge in Ottawa, we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Various of us around the country are in other lands. In my case, it would be the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Shanantan people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on February 25th, 2021, the committee is continuing its study of the subject matter of Bill C-15, an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. Once again, to ensure an orderly meeting, speak and listen in the official language of your choice, and at the bottom of your screen, using the globe icon, you can see it there, select either English or French. As you speak, you can change languages without changing that selection. Ensure your video is turned on when you speak. Speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. I must inform the committee pursuant to the motion of March 9th, 2021, that Al Benoit, Celeste McKay, Lorraine Whitman, and Melanie Omenijo have not completed the technical pretest. With us today by video conference from the Métis National Council, Vice President and National Spokesperson David Chartrand, Al Benoit, Chief of Staff, and Celeste McKay, Consultant. Thank you all. Just before I ask Mr. Chartrand to present, I understand that we have a hard stop at a quarter past the hour of our meeting, normal time. So we may have to adjust the time as we go along. But Mr. McKay, Mr. Chartrand, I'm asking you now to open up for 6 minutes on your presentation to committee. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Good, thank you. Well, thank you for allowing us to come to this very important committee. I want to start off by saying good morning to everyone, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me to speak today. Apologies for late submission that is coming your way in the French translation. We don't have a lot of funding in this particular section, so we always seem to be falling ourselves late, and I want to definitely express my apologies for our friends in Quebec. We will never forget them for standing up for L'Oreal, so we do apologize to them for, again, not having the French translation on time. I am pleased to speak on behalf of the Métis Nation support of Bill C-15 and the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in Canada. The Métis Nation is a distinct Indigenous nation based in Western Canada. We are a rights-holding nation under Section 35 of the Constitution, and we are a partner in Canada's Confederation. For the past year, the Métis Nation has worked collaboratively with the Inuit Katanami, the Assembly of First Nations, and the Government of Canada to develop legislation using former Bill C-262 as the floor. Bill C-15 is the result of this process. The human rights contained in the UN Declaration are the minimum standards for our survival, dignity, and well-being. And Bill C-15 sets out an effective process to implement these rights in Canadian law. In 2008, former MP Tina Keeper introduced a private member's bill to implement the UN Declaration in Canada. In 2016, Romeo Saganash did the same under Bill C-262. We are here today because, unfortunately, these bills did not receive royal assent. On the positive side, we have the foundation that these previous bills have provided, and we have the momentum to make change right now. We must not allow this opportunity to slip through our fingers. We have waited too long to see the rights of Indigenous people fully recognized. We believe that passing the bill into law is critical to a future that respects our rights as a nation. We urge members to expedite the process to ensure Bill C-15 is passed into this session of Parliament. We urge members to reject proposals for amendments that would impede this objective, including the amendments put forth by the Assembly of First Nations and British Columbia Assembly of First Nations. I will speak to this more in a few minutes. In November 2020, we held nationwide engagement sessions where we heard from a broad range of Métis Nation citizens throughout across our homeland. I think each of you have a copy of this, and you can read it, of course. Hopefully you read it. If not, please read it. We heard from Métis Nation women, elders, youth, persons with disabilities, and gender diverse persons and two-spirited persons. We heard from our leaders within La Femme Chef Temem Miswak, woman of the Métis Nation, which is part of our governing structure of the Métis Nation. In our engagement processes, the citizens of the Métis Nation voiced their strong support for the implementation of the UN Declaration and expressed hope that this bill will become law and positively impact their lives in the future. During these sessions, our citizens emphasized a number of areas where their rights matter in their daily lives. These included education, language, housing, health, child and family services, jobs, and economic opportunities. They also feel strongly about their right to self-determination and jurisdiction over lands, territories, and resources. We are strong protectors of our land. We also understand the role that responsible resource development plays in the economic security and well-being of our communities and for the prosperity of Canada as a whole. The Métis Nation is uniquely positioned to strike a balance between the environmental and economic factors of our homeland and resources. The recognition of our rights supports this. Our Métis Nation governments must have a central role in implementation, and we will work in partnership with the Crown and with industry when it comes to our land. The common theme in all of this is our inherent right to self-determination. This is our cardinal right. Much of the discussions around the bill and the declaration has centered around free and prior informed consent. This is a natural and necessary part of the rights to self-determination. I will speak again more on this later. Our lives are rich and deep, and our self-determination exhibited in many different areas. As you can see from the priorities of our citizens and from reading the declaration itself, our self-determination fortifies our citizens, communities, and a nation in a holistic manner. Bill C-92, passed in June 2019, is a good example. It was developed in partnership with Indigenous peoples and makes good progress towards implementing the UN Declaration in the area of child and family services. It does this by affirming our right to self-determination and affirming our jurisdiction over our nation's children. We continue to support this approach to implementation. It is also important to the Métis Nation that implementation of the UN Declaration through Bill C-15 is done in a meaningful, transparent, and accountable manner. The inclusion of the reporting requirements and an oversight mechanism to provide recourse for rights violations are key additions that strengthen this bill. Likewise, the success of the action plan is crucial for the meaningful implementation. The Declaration affirms the right to self-determination and supports the role of Indigenous governments in representing their nations. The action plan must reflect this. It must be developed in true partnership between the Government of Canada and Indigenous government. It must not be unduly limited in scope. It must be properly resourced so Indigenous peoples in Canada have the means to truly implement their rights. I'd like to turn now to the issues of certainty. Like with Bill C-262, claims that this bill will result in uncertainty that threaten economic opportunities has been a major point of contention. Let me be clear. Economic growth is very important to the Métis Nation and to Canada. Free and prior consent, informed consent is not a veto. It's not a veto. And implementing the UN Declaration will result in more certainty, not less. First, we must recognize that we have been living in uncertainty for years. This has resulted in using the court system to try to find certainty. We fought for our land rights in the courts for 32 years in the Manitoba Métis Federation case. We'll always stand up for our homeland and our self-determination. But Bill C-15 offers us a better way forward than fighting battles in courts. This is why I call the UN Declaration a blueprint for clarity. The market always tries to find greater certainty. This point has been raised several times before this committee, but look at how the market has responded to the uncertainty we have been living in. Industry has moved towards forming more respectful relationships with Indigenous people, and some companies, such as the Mining Association of Canada, have even looked to incorporate policies on free, prior, informed consent on their processes. This is how they have found greater certainty. The idea that moving further towards this approach through Bill C-15 would result in less certainty is nonsense. I would hold up the productive relationship that the Métis Nation has formed with industry groups such as the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, the Mining Association of Canada, and Enbridge as a further evidence that Bill C-15 will create greater certainty. These relationships have translated to projects that have provided tangible benefits for the Métis Nation and for Canada, such as projects that Manitoba Federation undertaken with Enbridge. Free, prior, informed consent is key to our ability to participate meaningfully in the decisions that impact our lives, our land, and our rights. This is necessary if our right to self-determination is to be upheld. We will be involved from the very beginning as partners in natural resource projects on other developments. We will look together for the best way forward in a way that builds consent, This is not a veto. I repeat again, this is not a veto. It does not undermine or override due process. There is due process if we are excluded. There is no due process, I'm sorry, if we are excluded. Free, prior, and informed consent ensures due process by ensuring our participation.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Mr. Chartrand, we're well over 6 minutes. And,
okay. Well, let me say this then. I usually don't read, Mr. Chairman. I speak right from the cuff, and because of this particular committee, and I want to give it the respect it deserves and the information it does deserve on such an important message that I think was very important for us to share as best we can. But let me say this: it's very clear that the matters, for example, the AFN is brought before you regarding amendments to be made. We made it very clear from our perspective that there's obviously a misreading of the preamble in paragraph 6. I want to conclude these comments, and that from the very perspective, our view is that it's crystal clear that the Métis Nation has existed in Western Canada before Canada was ever formed. So when we look at all of this, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure you could take the time to read the rest of the report yourselves, and I again apologize to my friends in Quebec that we will get it to you hopefully by today. But I want to make it clear, without Bill C-15 coming into play, there's going to be clear uncertainty. There's going to be more fights in the courts, more battles that'll take place. And again, if I'm a shareholder and a stockholder, and I sure as hell would not want to be putting my money in a particular unknown factor when I have a blueprint that's here in Canada. We were ranked number 1, Mr. Chairman, just recently, I think of yesterday's news, in the world, ranked number 1. If we want to retain that leadership, then this is a good example. We need to pass this, and we need to risk together. And I think we can do it together. I know that.
But Mr. Chartrand, I need to get to
okay, go ahead. I stopped there, Mr. Chairman.
And I apologize with the greatest respect, but
no problem.
Part of the exercise is to get the dialogue, and
go ahead.
We want to move ahead. Mr. Viersen, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Chartrand for being here today. I really appreciate it. It's he always says he speaks straight from the heart, and he usually does, and I much appreciate that. Mr. Chartrand, one of the issues, probably the main issue, is in the purpose of the act. There's just 2 pieces. That's Section 4 of the act, and there's 2 pieces of that. One is to provide, the second part of it is to provide a framework for the Canadian government to implement the declaration. I don't have a problem with that part. Where Conservatives have a problem is when it's saying that the declaration will be, the part A is the declaration will be a universal human rights instrument with application in Canadian law. Now, I don't doubt that it has application in Canadian law, but we can't just insert the declaration as Canadian law. We can't just declare it to be Canadian law, because it's much more of a framework. It's an aspirational document. I use UN documents and UN protocols often to identify, and so I've been recently quoted in the media as saying that the duty to consult is sufficient. I'm not sure that I think it's a system that's working. It's a system that continues to work its way out. But I would recognize that I used the Palermo Protocol which is a UN document, for identifying victims of human trafficking. We would, and I want to bring Canada in alignment with the Palermo Protocol. I used the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child as a framework, as things that gives me idea how do we bring Canada in alignment. And I also would use the UNDRIP as, okay, well, this is the framework. How do we bring Canada in line with it? It just doesn't translate into Canadian law directly. So to you, Mr. Chartrand, this is where I go with every witness. The duty to consult, as it's been worked out over generations, and free, prior, informed consent. To you, does that kind of, are we on the same wavelength with those two terms, or are we going to be introducing a whole new concept into the way that we do relationship between First Nations, Métis people, and the government of Canada? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I think if you look at it from the concept, as I said in my earlier references, this is the blueprint that gives clarity for everyone. And I think when you look at it from the context, that's why if you heard me loud and clear, this is not a veto. and you could record me over and over, and then if we go to court, you can use that as a clear example of my statement. That is not, we do not see it as a veto. We see it as a clear guidance of blueprint. Now, looking at the domestic law process of our situation in this country and the laws that are impacted, Section 35 has a clarity of duty to consult and sets the establishment, but usually it's after the fact is what we're finding ourselves in the duty to consult process in this country. And already by that time, courts are being, legal arguments are being filed in courts, and positions are being taken, or blockades are happening, and people have not started any discussion. I think this particular aspect of having this bill will give already the assurance and clarity. Let's understand this. No business is going to come in here. Let's look at mining, for example. Let's choose that one. If you're going to invest in mining, you're not coming in and going to start a mine tomorrow morning. It's about 10 years, 20 years of planning before you ever go down that road. I think this sets the clear foundation of how the industry will now have more comfort. If I'm a shareholder, I'm an investor, I sure as hell want to not put my money in some industry that I'm going to find out will be held up in the courts for the next 10 years. This will set the foundation of clarity between Section 35 and the clarity of ensuring free and prior consent, gives you the blueprint of how industry will work in Indigenous governments. It's very clear. It sets the two work actually very well together, and they'll have a clarity for both parties to understand where we're, including provincial and municipal governments.
So you don't think that there will be any muddying of the like the language is so different, right? Duty to consult and free, prior, and informed consent. Those are quite different terms.
No, they're not. They're not. I don't see it that way, because I see duty to consult as responsibility. It's a legal responsibility that industry and governments have.
And it's unique. It's unique to Canada. Like this is like your entire lifetime has been consumed with the duty to consult, the discussion around duty to consult, the court challenges, the government decisions that have taken place with that. Now to introduce new terms into that discussion, are you not at all worried that will just set us back some more, cause new court cases, all this kind of stuff?
I think I'm much older than you, so during my lifetime, duty to consult just actually really resonated itself into the works of our language today. This is not 30, 40 years ago. You didn't even see this happening. It's only in the last several decades that duty to consult is really grabbing a better footing in this country. But when you start to translate the free and prior consent, what is actually, let's understand this very clearly. If you're industry, and I deal with industry a lot, we're very strong economic thinkers in the Métis Nation. And I meet with the Enbridge, for example, every second month. The president and I have a discussion on the future of how our relationship looks. But what we make it very clear is this. We have that relationship. These types of bills, like this particular one, is setting the blueprint for us, how we come together, how we quit fighting in the courts, how we quit holding up production and opportunity. In Manitoba, for example, our mining institutions have gone down. They should be going up, and there should be more investment. But if you're shy to come and invest because if you don't know what is going to happen to your investments, well, you're not going to just come knocking on a door of a province or in Western Canada, for example, for us. So I think these two will work together. There'll be a lot of clarity between the two, and I think one of the strongest issues you had as a conservative is this issue of veto. I am making it very clear right here before this country. This is not a veto. And you can take that to any courtroom. This is not a veto for Indigenous people. It's a blueprint between us, industry, and government. How we should have done this 20 years ago, 50 years ago, we wouldn't be even, we'd be further ahead in this country beyond anywhere else. So I think it's very clear.
Thank you. Mr. Pawlowski. Mr. Pawlowski, you have 6 minutes.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most interesting panels in discussing this. Let me first ask, is in UNDRIP, is there any mention of people of mixed descent? I was looking through it, and I don't think so. I do see Article 33 says Indigenous people have the right to determine their membership, but is there any other reference to people of mixed descent? If you have to look, don't worry, because my question is going to go on for that.
I don't have to look. I can tell you right now. I think the message in UNDRIP is very clear. It allows Indigenous governments to be governments. It sets the clarity of recognizing them as governments that we have a responsibility, and governments have a responsibility, my including the Métis Nation, to establish who is the Métis Nation, who belongs to the Métis Nation, and it's up to us to decide it, not to you. So it's very clear that this particular style of language in here assures us as Indigenous people we will govern ourselves, government to government. That's what it's all about, nation to nation. So for the question whether it allows mixed ancestry inside there or allows that group or this group, allow us as governments to establish our own challenges of how we overcome some of these unknowns that this Constitution in Canada has created for all of us.
The reason I ask is because I know this is a United Nations document, and throughout the world there's a lot of people of mixed descent. For example, in Mexico, the majority of people are mestizo, which is a combination of Indigenous and white descent. My wife's Filipina. In the Philippines, they have their Indigenous groups too, and they're often intermixed with the other local populations. So I know in developing UNDRIP, I would have thought that the various countries around the world considered where do the people of mixed descent lie with respect to UNDRIP. So now I don't know if you were part of the development of UNDRIP at the United Nations, but I was wondering as to what discussion there was at the United Nations about people of mixed descent and where they fell in it. And also I know a number of other countries throughout the world have enacted some kind of legislation giving legal power to UNDRIP in those jurisdictions, and what has been the interpretation in those jurisdictions as to people of mixed descent. Well, and I throw that open to any of you out there as to.
No. Let me start off this way, Mr. Pawlowski. I think it's very clear. I travel the world quite a bit. I'm doing some work with the Indigenous people of Colombia. I've been going back and forth for a number of years now. We've been involved in the United Declaration since 1945, when the first discussions was taking place in that level. And of course, our president, Clement Chartier, actually still really actively involved in international matters. Now, if you look at the mestizo, you call them, in their own countries, they are working out their details of who's who. No different than you go to Australia, where they call them yella, that mean yellow. So they're saying, well, they're a mixed people. They're not really us, because they have different bloods in their vein, so a different color in their skin. So there's different versions of how people are looking at it. But what I do recognize when I travel the world is they're working towards it. They're working to how they all interrelate and understand each other and respect each other's jurisdictions. And each of them are formulating their own levels of voices and levels of positions. No matter where you travel in the world, you see that happening, whether it's even in Japan, where they came to see me regarding the Aino, which they're fearful they're going to be leaving this world and losing their very existence. There's only about 20,000 of them left. And so they came to ask us, how did we survive? And so there's people out there trying to formulate their existence, their legal rights. And as the world proceeds, as if we're going to still be ranked number one, I think we let our Indigenous governments figure out their own problems, and nobody should tell us how our government should be looking.
Let me bring it closer to home now. I think we've discussed this before. So I worked in Norway House for a while. In Norway House, there are people in Norway House who are status, and then there are people who are non-status, and so I think basically Métis. And how, if any, does UNDRIP? Is there any difference in the way and what UNDRIP will mean to those two different communities, or are they basically the same under UNDRIP?
Well, in Western Canada, you're either First Nation, Métis Nation, or Inuit. That's the three peoples that you'll find in Western Canada. And from our perspective, there's a lot of similarities in the matters as we look forward in the environment or in the lands and mutual sharing of how we work on the lands. Our governance systems are somewhat different. Our electoral systems are somewhat different. But at the end of the day, we each recognize our own jurisdiction. So it's very clear this has been worked out, because this has been going on for a long, long time. I think where the challenge lies for many is when legislations come and change, whether it's First Nations and the Indian Act changed a lot of their challenges, and where they're struggling to get a balance of control now away from Canada. But again, when you look at it, there's a clear understanding between both parties. When you come to the prairies, you'll see that they know who the Métis Nation are, they know who the First Nation are, and they know it are. That especially not a big population, but they're in Manitoba for sure.
That brings us pretty much to time, Marcus. Thank you. Madame de Bellefeuille, vous avez la parole. 6 minutes.
Madame de Bellefeuille, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chartrand, I would like to thank you for the quality and the clarity of your presentation. I also wanted to thank you for taking the time to highlight the delays in translation, in the French translation of your document. Thank you for highlighting that. It is very important to me that you did it, so thank you very much. I would like for you to talk about something further. Perhaps I missed it, but could you tell me if there are any amendments that are proposed? Because I know that your group has not proposed any amendments to C-15. Do you believe there are amendments that you don't agree with?
See this. I apologize. Am I on? Okay, good. There is one particular amendment that we would support. If as long as it doesn't, I'll tell you why, and thank you for your kind words. Let me say this. The reason we're not making any amendments is this is not a perfect document. We all know that in this room. But it's a good document. It's a starting document. And for us, we can change it as we move forward. There's no difference than we're still fighting the Constitution in this country in Canada right now, how it will work for all of us. And we still got work to do for sure on that issue. So this particular document itself is not the perfect document. I did make reference in my report. You'll find it in page 7, second bullet. If there were to be changes, there's only one amendment that the Métis Nation would support: the addition of the term racism and systemic racism and discrimination to section 62A1, which speaks to the measures contained in the action plan to be developed. This is consistent with our priority to address systemic racism, discrimination, violence against Indigenous people, Indigenous elders, youth, children, women, men, persons with disabilities, and gender diverse persons and two-spirit persons, as long as it does not hold up this bill. This bill needs to get in and get royal assent, and for us to make history and for us to show the world that why this country is ranked #1. And so for me, why we're not seeing amendments from the Métis Nation is because we want this to get true royal assent first. We can still fix it in the future. It's because it's not a perfect document.
Merci beaucoup. Une autre question pour vous.
Thank you very much. I have another question for you, Mr. Chartrand. Could you tell me how you see or how you hope to play your role in the process of the creation of the action plan? How do you concretely see your role and your participation in the redaction of the action plan?
Well, it's from our perspective, the way I see is the transformation that's occurring in this country right now. And I hope all governments would support that transformation and not say, oh, the Liberals started, so we can't support it, or the NDP started, we can't support it, or the Bloc started, we can't support it. There's a translation of a change of an action and ideology in this country for nation to nation, government to government, that's really resonating to change. It's going to change the future. I'm telling you as a leader with 40 years of experience fighting for Indigenous rights, that this nation-to-nation, government has already fundamentally changed where we're going. It's going to see massive change. And I hope every party supports this. When you look at this particular process of action plan, we will be involved as long as it's respected a nation-to-nation, government-to-government. We are governments in the prairies. We operate governments. We're democratically elected like anybody else. In fact, we're probably more democratically elected than the leaders of this country based on our structure of our constitution. So when you look at it from the context, as long as there's a clear respect to us as a government, we will and should always be involved. If you're going to leave us out, I don't care what party you are, then it's a failure. You're going to fail. I don't care who you are, how smart you think you are, how good you think you are. You will fail if you don't have inclusionary. ideology attached to it. But government to government, nation to nation is the right approach. And I assure you, in this country, 10 years from now, and if I look around the crowd, we're still going to be alive, I hope. But if you look 10 years from now, the actions that you see today on government to government, nation to nation, and the funding formulas, you're going to see changes. I'll give you one example. In Manitoba, in a year and a half, we have 600 families that bought their own houses ever since the transformation of our power to make decisions on the basis of housing. 600 families, young families that bought their own houses, own them. So think about this, 20 years from now, those kids have an asset for their parents are going to leave behind for them. They're going to have a head start. So when you start looking at this, as long as we're treated as a government, respected as a government, included as a government, then there should be no problem in the action plan.
Avez-vous...
Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair? So, we understand your wishes to speak nation to nation. The Bloc Québécois agrees with that completely. Mr. Chartrand, could you tell me if you have any concerns regarding what happens before or after adopting this bill? Can you share any concerns that you have for what happens after C-15?
Well, let's start first what happened before. Right now, my biggest fear is this document to be used as a weaponized tool for political purposes, not for what its good intention will do for industry, for us, and for Indigenous people, and for governments, and for this country. I think if it's not used as a weaponized political tool, everybody does it on the conscience of all the education and information received, it should go smoothly. On the second, after the aftermath, you will see greater participation between industry and us. It's already slowly happening because they see it coming. Industry sees it. Industry always thinks years ahead, and they see it coming. There's a transition form coming. So let's not use it as a fear mongering. It's going to kill industry. It's going to kill businesses. It's not going to, it's actually going to enhance it, assure shareholders, assure everybody business, the doors are open for business. At the same time, we're going to protect the environment. And if we work together on that, there's no way we're going to fail in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Chartrand. And now, Ms. Blaney, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chartrand, for your speech today. I thought it was very important, and I want to especially thank you for clarifying that all other government structures have free, prior, and informed consent, and this is just about making it fair. My first question to you is, in 2019, the government of British Columbia introduced Bill 41, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Bill 41 authorizes provincial governments to enter into agreements with Indigenous governing bodies for the purpose of establishing joint decision-making or consent with respect to the use of statutory powers. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, and do you believe there are benefits with this approach, and should Bill C-15 be amended to include this provision?
Well, I actually complimented Premier Morgan and Oregon and the rest of them in British Columbia for their far-reaching vision of moving on this pathway. And I think it's something, if you look at the First Nations in British Columbia, they're very well spoken, very well adversed on the rights and issues of their matters. And so is the Métis trying to find their place in British Columbia. But when you look at it overall, I think it's a true ability for setting the foundation of what BC is going to do for business, and how everybody's going to be a player and a partner. So I think it's going to really assure the comfort for industry, and hopefully the balance itself as it grows, we'll see less and less hostility. If we go to East Coast, there's a fight on lobsters, for example, right now. So if we could find a balance of how we work together, where people are going not to be fearful of a change. But as you know, everybody is scared of change. Everybody, I don't care who you are. Oh, change! You put your back up. So, but it's very clear. I think that BC is setting a path forward. It's putting an example. It can work and will work, but everybody's got to be committed to it.
Thank you. My second question is, Brenda Gunn, a law professor from the University of Manitoba, shared with the committee that Bill C-15 was, and I quote, an important step towards reconciliation, towards recognizing inherent human rights, towards a fairer and more just Canada for all. I'm just wondering if you agree with this assertion.
Well, I agree 100%. I think it's truly a blueprint that sets the foundation of clarity for everybody to work together. And I think everybody wants that. Industry wants it, political parties want it, government want it, provincial, municipal governments, and just people want it. So I think she's absolutely right. It sets the foundation of a clarity of how we can all come together, and it becomes a win-win situation instead of win and lose. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to embrace this, but we need to make it happen. We can't let it not happen. It's got to get royal assent, or we're going to lose it. If there's something happens now, we're in a minority government state, could be election, and then dies again. We've seen 3 examples already: Gina Keeper, Saginash, and now we have this new bill. And now if it dies again, what are we telling the rest of the world what Canada stands for? Reconciliation is nothing but a word after that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important thing for all of us to be considering. I'm curious if you could just talk about how Bill C-15 would support the advancement of Métis rights in Canada, and if so, how that's going to roll out and what that's going to mean for those communities, for your communities.
I don't think it advances Métis rights because we already have those rights. I think what it does is sets the clarity of the process. It sets the clarity of how people and industry needs to work with us. And I'll give you a perfect example. In Enbridge, and I speak highly of Enbridge. You know, people have criticized Enbridge in the past, but I speak highly of them because they knocked on our door and said, look, we want to work with you. We want to sit down together. We want to partner with you, but we don't want a one-year agreement. That's typical of industry to come in, get their product done, get the pipe in the line, walk away and say, see you 50 years from now. Enbridge has changed that ideology, and actually they're changing their method of hiring, their method of procurement, all of these things that they're working on right now. But we have into a 50-year agreement we're working on towards now. So if we're talking, and I think he said it right, President of Enbridge, I'll say very clearly. He said, you know what? We all know I'll be gone, so will you, David, he said. But we have to come back in 50 years to change that pipeline again, no matter what, or we got to take it out. One way or another, it only lasts 50 years. We got to come back. That's the law. So at the end of the day, he said, I'd rather have a relationship now and stay with you in 50 years. So when we come back, there's not a fight. There's not a disagreement. We're all working in the same path. So this is kind of the ideology that's slowly being embraced by industry. And they see that partnership is the way to go. And I believe that my leadership, and I believe that's what made us very successful. I had 3 staff. I got 900 staff now, and I run a lot of businesses. And when you look at it overall, you could see that from a partnership perspective, it's always going to be a win-win.
So in the last committee, the national chief from the AFN recommended that our committee get rid of the preamble paragraph 6, which states, whereas First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis Nation have throughout history and to this day lived in the lands that are now in Canada with their distinct identities, cultures, and ways of life. I'm just wondering if you have any comments about his proposed amendment.
Well, when you read his amendment, firstly, I was quite surprised that they're making amendments because I know how strongly advocating Perry has been on getting distinct royal assent. That's his dream and his aspiration to get it there. By putting amendments, you hold everything back. So I was quite taken a little bit back on why amendments would be coming so late in the game. But when you look at the statement they're trying to make, is that the Métis do not have land all across Canada, which is true. However, we are a nation and have land and owned land and ran land, controlled land in the prairies before Canada became Canada. We have been around for 300 years. We've got battles from 1816 on, 10 battles we fought with this country. So when you look at it overall, like we've a long existing place in history in Western Canada. So that's why I put in if you look in page 6, you'll find in the first bullet where I made it very crystal clear that the Métis Nation was existed in Western Canada before Canada was formed. Their position was it does not state the preamble or does not state that the Métis Nation and First Nation have similar lived in all of the land. That I agree with. But in the land of the prairies, there's not a doubt. History has shown us. The Supreme Court has recognized that. So I think that was their intent. But I was a little bit taken aback on amendments coming in. I didn't expect that from AFN because I know they want royal assent as badly as I do.
Thank you very much. And we move now to a 5-minute round of questioning. And I have on my list Mr. Schmale, Mr. Van Couverden, Mr. Bellefeuille, Rachel again, Eric Melillo, and one other. So, Mr. Schmale, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon now, Mr. Chartrand. I appreciate the contribution. I do appreciate the conversation we're having today. Lots of great input. Maybe maybe some additional clarification, because you did talk about free, prior, informed consent not being a veto, and okay, I appreciate that. The issue we're having now is, so Grand Chief Bellegarde of the AFN has been quoted as saying a number of times, in fact, and the quote is, "You simply cannot tell people that they have no right to say no to what happens to them. Imagine a system where you cannot say no." That's what we have had for more than a century under the Indian Act, and that's what led to the mess we are in today, end quote. So I do agree with that. I guess, so based on what you said, based on what Chief Bellegarde said, what do we do when we're in a conflict situation? Does the government of Canada have, say for a major infrastructure project, and we have one nation against another nation, one wants it, one doesn't, who makes that final decision? Is that still the government of Canada? I think that's the clarification we're looking for, and I know that could be the next step after C-15 too.
Well, that's the way to answer that, Jimmy, is this. We have Indigenous governments already. And if you look at the challenge that I faced in this country for a while, you had the hereditary chiefs and the elected chiefs. So, but what's important, we're going to let them work it out. That's their business, not ours. It's not yours, it's not mine, it's their business. They need to recognize that we need to respect their governments and their structures. So for that perspective, I think as we move forward, we're just making transitional ideology changes in this country about recognizing Indigenous governments to be truly equal governments. So we're not even there yet, but we're getting our mindset to move towards that. And I think once we get there, it's like me getting a group of Canadians together and saying, I represent Canada now. I'm now the new Prime Minister of Canada because I have a group now behind me of citizens. Well, you would tell me you're crazy. Go to hell here. I got elected as an MP. I sit in the Conservative Party. We're the opposition at this point in time, maybe future government. But you would not accept me to say I can get a group of people together overnight and call myself a new name and become Prime Minister. So we have Indigenous governments. Let them do their job and let them clarify their own issues. That's up to them. And when we try to stick our nose in their businesses, this is where trouble lies. And we've worked, for example, in the Federation. For 1967, we created our Constitution. It's been standing strong since 1967. And we are recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada as the rightful voices of our government for our people. So from that perspective, I think it's very clear we're getting there. We still got a ways to go with unfortunately, citizens to recognize Indigenous people have governments that are equal to federal, provincial, municipal governments, so that we have the same jurisdictional powers to create our own governments. Once we get there, I think we'll solve that problem.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and I do accept that. Each nation has their own way of governance, and I accept that. I absolutely I agree. The issue still is, I guess, one says yes, one says no to infrastructure project, and if I'm a company and I still can't get consensus, but again, one nation says yes, one says no, who makes that final decision?
The government, just like you would. If you were sitting as a government, the government make that decision. So we can't, everybody has opinions. I'm a president of my government, and my cabinet and my government will make that decision for all of us. Actually, to show you our advanced thinking of it, Jamie, maybe that could be something that people can look at. We got which is called Resolution Number 8. Resolution Number 8 actually contains, I have 140 locals in this province from all the villages and communities right across the province that make our grassroots voices and then can compile themselves to give us direction, our regional assemblies and annual assemblies. Resolution 8 was actually unanimously adopted by 3,000 leaders and people in this province to say this, that no industry, no Indigenous local, a Métis local on its own can negotiate with industry without the Métis government sitting at the table to ensure all citizens are being protected. So from that perspective, it's been adopted by all of our local leaders, our regional leaders, and our provincial leaders. So we're going in that pathway. So I think many will follow. It's just a matter of getting there, but allow governments to do their job. Like we allow you, if you're a federal government, we have no choice but allow you. You're the government, and we got to let you and fight with you and argue with you until we get our way, maybe. But at the end of the day, we got to respect you as a government, and we'll get there. Let the governments grow, and they're growing, but treat them as one. And then Like, you'll call me an organization, but don't call me that. Call me a government. I am a government. I take that personal, and because we work so hard to ensure that we operate and be responsible as a government.
I think the chair is going to cut me off very shortly.
1 minute. Go ahead.
Oh, I do have a minute. Okay, perfect. I want to.
No, you don't. But sorry.
How much
you're,
time do I
you're
have?
a 5 minute guy. We're past. I'm sorry. I had
Okay.
you in for
Can I make
6.
one quick comment? One quick
Sure,
comment.
go ahead.
If I had more time, I was going to get you to elaborate more on the acquisition of private property, but
we got more to
thank you
come.
for that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Sorry about that. Mr. Vancouverton, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And President Chartrand, thanks for coming back. It's always nice to hear from you. And, whether you're speaking from well-prepared notes or you're speaking from the heart, I think you make your point really, really clear, and your knowledge and your wisdom on this file and your work is very evident. So I can't thank you enough. I'm really struck with the reality of a little bit of a transition in how the Conservatives are portraying this bill. Now they've stopped talking about a veto, and now they're talking about a duty to consent, or duty to work with. And I'm kind of struck with the reality that I feel like people are just telling Indigenous people, that people on this committee and elsewhere are telling Indigenous people what they should be happy with, or that things have been fine for the last 20 or 30 years. I was quite struck with the comment from Mr. Viersen about, well, things have been fine for the last 30 years, in his lifetime or something like that. I just have to speak up about that. I just disagree. I don't think the status quo is good enough, and I don't think you do either. And based on your comments, I don't think the status quo is what we want to hold ourselves to as a standard for a country or as a government. I think progress is necessary, and we've got to change and do better. And I would just love your reflections on a better future for everybody in this country, and that's got to include not just the participation and not just the telling communities how we're going to manage their lands that they have, the rights holders of, but working truly together, and what actual collaboration means.
Mm-hmm. Well, the sad part about all this is when you look at the history of all of this, why we're where we are today in society, right? All that history is reflection. And my mom used to always teach me this, and I speak fluent Soto. And when I used to leave, my mom always told me, she said, never forget where you come from. And I never will. I grew up very, very poor. My mom raised us by a single mother, and I understand what poverty is. I understand what struggle is, and we lived a life, and I never changed in a million years. I love the way we grew up, even though we were very, very poor. But at the end of the day, if you look at where we're at in society, we shouldn't be there. And I give the perfect example, and this is such a pictorial way you can look at it. If you look at the 1870, when Manitoba was created, the Métis leadership at the time set aside 1.4 million acres of land for the children, plus they also built Section 32 of the Constitution for the parents. But 1.4 million acres of land set aside for the children. The Mennonites were given 586,000. I use them as a perfect example because they're a perfect example of what could production do, what can the future give you if you work as a community, allowed to be running as a community, and don't interfere. So you look at the progress of the Mennonites. They got less than half the land set aside. They are today in Manitoba the richest, most powerful people in many aspects. And I'm very proud of them. I'm seriously proud of them. Because you look at the Métis Nation, we were chased off our lands, pushed away to go live wherever we could find called the road allowance people. Imagine, I said, for a second, if our lives did not get interference and we can get chased off our, we'd almost be the most powerful, richest people in Manitoba today. No doubt. We're very economically strong thinkers and strong business people, hardworking people. So when you look at today, change needs to happen. Because you can't keep on having society or Canadians as a whole saying, we're tired of paying for the Indigenous people, we're tired of paying for them. And to just be saying, well, you're using our land, you're using our assets, you're taking all our riches. So there's a imbalance that happens between the ideologies between the growth of Canadians and educating everybody. So we need to find that balance of how we come together. This is the future. This is the future we're talking about today that's taking us there. So industry, I guarantee you, industry I speak to are, once they get to really see and hear you, they're not afraid of this no more. They're gone past that. They're ready for business. They're ready to sit down. And trust me, I invest millions in shareholder in institutions in this country and outside of this country. And when we look at it, any shareholders investing wants to know a surety their money is being well planned, well protected, and that's going to make money for and return back to them. So industry knows now they can trust a new pattern, a new process, a blueprint. So this is what this is going to take us. We cannot see the change that I said earlier. Nation to nation, government to government is going to see change 10 years, 20 years from now. I guarantee you that right now. I've been fighting this right from 18 years old, and I'm 61 years old today. So when you look at it from that perspective, this change is coming. And UNDRIP is another pathway that's going to really make and play catch up for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to come in comparison economically, educationally, and so forth and so forth. It's catching up. We're this country just slowly catching up with something we should have done 50 years ago or 80 years ago.
Thank you very much.
President Chartrand.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for your reflection on the Mennonites. I lived for a few years in the Mennonite community, and among the first boat people in Canada were in the village of Wellesley near Kitchener, brought in by the Mennonite Relief Society. They're quite a remarkable group. Thanks for that. Thank you, sir. Madame de Bellefeuille, vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
Madame de Bellefeuille, 2.5 minutes, please. Madame de Bellefeuille? Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chartrand. I would like for us to go back to where we left off during the first round of questions. You said that you were concerned that this bill might be used as a political tool to be used, but that wouldn't make any real change. What are you hoping for through adopting Bill C-15? What real change are you hoping for?
Well, I think thank you for the question, and again recognizing that I saw this from my eyes, and many of our cabinet and other people in the West see this as being used as a tool to scare industry that if we support this, it will kill their future and their opportunity. That is not true. I guarantee you it's not true. But however, how I see change is that you look at the educational aspect of the Métis people, for example, in Manitoba. Let's look at the health situation in Manitoba. We're behind everybody else. We have the highest chronic illnesses than everybody else. But people have to understand this and say, okay, we'll fix that. But if you don't start putting a plan in action, how you can actually be inclusive in ensuring the people you're speaking of are actually part of it, you're not going to solve the problem. And so, but at the end of the day, Métis pay billions of dollars in taxes annually. Every year, billions we pay and taxes. But when you look at services that come to us, because for whatever jurisdictional debate that still happens in this country between the province and the federal government, we're left out. And so when you look at it from that concept, we are pushed out of the process of being included. I think this process will allow now that the country and the governments will have responsibility to include the Métis Nation, to be part of the process of doing the right thing. Because at the end of the day, I'm still a Canadian. I'm still going to use these hospitals, but I'm going to cost you 10 times more. And it's going to be 10 times more the taxpayer bill. So when you look at it overall, if we work together, we can stop and prevent this type of situation, including our children. We did a study. Our kids, madam, is falling further behind than anybody else. And that shouldn't be. Why should we be the ones falling behind in education-wise? From 0 to 3, 3 to 5, we're doing all these studies now. I have evidence if anybody wants a copy of them from the University of Winnipeg that are doing studies. Our children are falling behind every other child in when it comes to education in this country. And it shouldn't be. That's our future. That's our investment. We want them one day to be working and paying taxes to make sure we get old age pension in this country. So we want to make sure there's a process established where the next generation will have it better than we do. That's how all of us as parents think that way. All of us as leaders think that way. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that this bill passes. I could see the future changing coming with this, the mindset changing in this country.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chartrand. And Ms. Blaney, 2.5, go ahead.
Thank you. And I guess my last question, and I've really appreciated this conversations. I know one of the chiefs in my riding once said to me, one of the most frustrating parts is this process of incremental justice with a little bit, and you're just not getting to that place, which I really hear clearly from you is where you want to get. And I think I appreciate so much that you're talking about this is a government. And as a government, all other governments in Canada have the right to free, informed, and prior consent. So why is it that Indigenous governance structures are not the same? And I know you talked a lot about industry, and I know that an industry isn't going to do well in my riding when they come to see me, ask for an introduction to Indigenous communities. Their leadership comes to see me, and their Indigenous manager goes to see the government of a nation. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about what you think this bill will do to start to get other industries and other governments in Canada to understand that this is a governance structure that they are talking to.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on its head when you talk about why is it for other governments that are recognized in this country to have free prior consent and not Indigenous governments, which again is absolutely true. Why should not be? Because we are governments. And I think if it's very clear, if there's any blueprint we can start to look at is what is already starting to happen. The mining institutions, the petroleum institutions, Enbridge, all those big companies, these are massive companies worth billions upon billions of dollars, but they're seeing a future. Them too. They're saying, wow, okay, there's a change coming in this country. If you go to other foreign countries, as I'm sure you know, they can go, like I got a call from Colombia. They're asking me to go in a system, but I got to be careful. They asked me to go a system because they found a bunch of gold, they say, in their lands. And so they're worried as Indigenous people. They're saying, what if the Colombian government just comes in and sweeps it off of us now? And they're saying, can I help them? Give them some advice and so forth. So those days are exactly to hold back in the 1800s, late 1800s, 1900s. There's a transitional change happening in Canada. We can see it. All we have to do is play catch up amongst ourselves. When you look at party platforms, I read all of them. I read the 2019 platforms for all parties. Aaron O'Toole saying he's going to bring reconciliation under his government also. He's going to bring it under his party. I see the NDP is powerful in that particular aspect. I see the Liberals are powerful in that, and Bloc Québécois will always support the Métis. That I can count on, right? Anyway, but it's very clear from our perspective. We look towards the future, and I think the future is telling everybody there's a blueprint being established here. And if we all follow this blueprint, there is nothing but positive change going to be coming. It's a win-win for everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Chartrand. Mr. Melillo, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank Mr. Chartrand for his comments today, giving us a lot to think about already. And one of the comments that I picked up, I don't remember when now you were saying this, but you stressed the importance of being included in the process. I believe perhaps in response to the questioning from our friend from the block. I'm just wondering if you can speak a bit about the process of consultation on C-15 to this point, and if you feel it has been adequate consultation with the Métis Nation.
Okay, let's, in Manitoba, unfortunately, we're in a very peculiar position I've not seen in a long time, where the government is trying to avoid consultation. But what's happening is I'm filing matters into courts. So I'm going to be holding up process. I'm, being criticized for holding up the diversion between Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba. But I'm not holding it up. I'm not opposed to it. I need to understand and ensure my people, my fishers, our economic engines out there, that the land and the water will not have a dire effect 10, 20 years from now. So we need proper consultation. Now, in my province, it's not happening. And I know there's a question that was going to be raised earlier. It was raised by Jamie, I think, about Crown lands. When you look at Crown lands in Manitoba, a lot of the ranchers are really getting a hold of me. A lot of the farmers are getting a hold of me. They're very concerned what's happening to Crown land. The prices have gone up threefold in 2 years. They can't afford it no more. But what's happening is they're putting up for private sale. And so guess what's going to happen now, Mr. Emilio? I'll be filing into the courts. I'll be saying you can't sell Crown land without duty to consult and proper consultation. But if they would just follow the UN declaration, we wouldn't be there. The Premier and I'd be sitting at a table somewhere. We coming to terms of how we look to where's the future of this province that we both like and both love and both support, and how we work together to achieve that. So I think the issue here, when you look at it, there's already a situation where if the UN declaration was in place and being respected, I think that we'd avoid the courts many, many more times in the future. And I can't say enough. The judges have said in Ontario and everywhere else where you're from, get out of it. You got elected, do your job. Quit bringing matters for us to adjudicate on your behalf. So from our perspective, we're saying very clearly, consultation is the way to go. This gives you a blueprint of how we get together. once we respect each other, there's no doubt it's going to be a success.
Thank you very much. I can appreciate those comments. I think maybe you're looking a little further ahead than I was when I was meaning to ask the question, though. And I'll try to bring it back just to when the government was developing C-15 itself, and do you feel that there was an adequate consultation, adequate dialogue? I understand what you're saying about once it's in effect, but just
okay. I understand your question. I thank you. Yeah. I thank you for that. It's a good question. Yes, definitely there was that. What of course took a lot of it away from all of us is COVID. COVID was restraining us to do what we traditionally would do. Like as I said, one day you should come to my assembly. It'll be in October this year if COVID allows me to have it. You'll see 3,000 citizens coming from across Manitoba to listen to its government, and that's a lot. That's a big convention, probably some bigger than your conventions you guys have. So it's a massive group of people, leaders coming together. So, but when you look at it from that concept, our consultations, I gave it a document. I believe I told you to take a check on it. We talked with as many different people from a diversity from every sector of our society, try to get their opinions and views. So, but I assure you, if COVID was not there, we'd have more of a robust process where our style, I'm sure like yours, I like to be with the people. I like to be there as a leader. I like to talk to them, see their faces, see their body language. I can't do that, of course, as we can't do here in Zoom world we're in. But yes, there was good consultation. There was adequate funding for us to do what we had to do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, how am I for time?
I got a minute.
About a minute. Okay, before I ask my last question, maybe I'll just take the opportunity, Mr. Chartrand, as a member of Parliament for Kenora, just to thank you for the work you're doing and the advocacy you're doing there. Obviously, many Métis people living in the Kenora region, and I know that I want to just express the appreciation for the work you're doing to represent them. Just very quickly, I know you've touched on it already, but if just coming back to the questions around consent and who's able to give consent and sort of that process, just if you can explain any more clarity on that, maybe anything you haven't been able to add in your comments thus far.
Well, the same process, Mr. Milio, is this. When we have to get approval, we have to go to the government of Canada when it's a federal jurisdiction. When we have to go to provincial government for their approval and their decision of how they're moving forward. Same thing will go with the Métis governments. Like we have already, as I said, expressed to you very clearly here, that we have already thought of a lot of these things ahead of time. Our structure is so grassroots driven and so desired for protecting democracy that the voices of the people are essential. And like, for example, as me as president, I report to 7 regional assemblies across this province on the annual operations of its government. Then I report to the provincial assembly with 3,000 people at the end to show the full aspect of where we're going. So when you look at it from that standpoint, I think the issues of our governments are already standing. First Nations have practiced their operation of government for many, many years, and we go back hundreds and hundreds of years of using the same style of governance to the style we have today, as Lou Riel had and as Cuthbert Grant had when he was a leader at one time. So when you look at the rules and laws of our nation, we're well set in governance formats, and I think people give us that respect and let us do our job. I think we'll get very quick consents. I think probably we'll get consent faster than the federal government of this and the provincial government of our country. So
well, I'm not consenting to any more time on this answer. Sorry, we have to move. We have another panel coming in, and we want to make sure everybody gets their chance. Ms. Zan, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I just want to say hello, President Chartrand. It's so nice to see you, and I can see you face to face here, even though it's on Zoom. And I just want to say I really admire the Métis people and your nation for everything that you've accomplished. When I first landed in Canada as an 8-year-old child, we came to Regina, Saskatchewan, where my dad was a professor at the university there. And there was an unveiling of the statue of Louis Riel in 1968. And we went to that as one of our first events as a family. And actually, we met Prime Minister Trudeau, the senior, there. So Louis Riel and his rebellion and his fight for the rights for his people has meant a lot to me and to my family. So thank you for all that you do. I wanted to say that you talk about UNDRIP being a blueprint, and I also want to stress the fact that that the declaration, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, has made a clear reference to the consideration and protection of Indigenous women. And by its commitment to implement UNDRIP, Canada agrees also to measures to improve the economic and social conditions of Indigenous peoples by taking into account the special needs of elders, women, youth, children, and persons with disabilities. And you had mentioned 62A1 regarding racism and violence towards Indigenous peoples. So can you expand a little bit on that and how you feel that Bill C-15 will help and help the people in this regard?
Well, I think it sets. Thank you again for the question. It was resistance, not rebellion.
Sorry,
Yeah, just in case. But anyways, from my perspective, I think if you look at the issue of racism discrimination, you see it happening right now by our young population out there that's screaming out about police brutality. They're watching what's happening in the United States, and then there's some happening here in Western Canada and Canada. So our people are talking why is it that it's a black person? Why is it an Indigenous person that's getting killed? Why is it happening to those particular groups of people? Why is the Asian people now being beaten? And why is this still happening in this beautiful country or a mosaic of a beautiful multicultural society? And Riel had that vision, and that's good you compliment him because he did have that vision. If you look back at his writings of bringing all people to such a rich, prosperous land. So when you look at it from the concept, I think from racism to discrimination, we gotta all come back together. But I think if there's an actual clarity that it's a responsibility of the government to make sure it's included in the blueprint of their mandate, not that it happens to be this government or that government, and hopefully they're going to put it in their campaign trail when they're going out that they're going to be committed to this. It actually will be setting a process and a law that makes it clear that whoever's sitting as a government has a responsibility to ensure they combat racism, that they find a way to stop this. We do not allow this in the country. We have a beautiful country. I'm so proud of my country. Canada, I would go to war still at 61 if people ask me to go defend it. So I love Canada. But from my perspective, we're losing our pathway. We need to get back to the basics of it. And we can't get lost in the politics of it at times. And we need to find out that parties are going to be assuring all society, all Canadians, that when they take over the realm of this country, they have a responsibility, and there's a bill that tells them they have to combat racism and try to stop it, do everything in their power to prevent it, and try to solve a solution to how we overcome it. So I think this bill actually gives a lot of guidance and protections, but it also sets the mandate. We don't have to worry whether it's going to be their political party platform or not. It's actually going to be very clear to them they have an obligation and a legal obligation to do it.
Thank you. I would believe it's about human rights, really, isn't it? It's about the fact that we need to accept everybody as equal and not some people more than others. And so it sounds to me that this is why you also would feel that it's important to establish a legislated framework to move forward with implementing the principles of the United Nations Declaration here in Canada. Is that correct?
For sure, without doubt. We believe we need to find solution. We have the issue of missing and murdered women coming up again. It'll come up to Parliament very soon. There's an announcement coming up. In our government, yeah, our government. Just to give you a heads up, our Métis government in Manitoba, we've committed $1 million to this particular program to find missing families. We call it, and the name we gave it is called "Bring Me Home." And Michif, it's called Pekewe Tahin, and so it tells you we're giving a voice to those lost souls that are somewhere buried or hidden somewhere in this world. That the MMF government on its own, not federally, not provincially, we put up $1 million of rewards to find all, not just Métis, First Nation, non-Indigenous. I think we all have a responsibility, and we need to work together to help that situation. That's part of racism that took that situation, that actually killed those people, innocent people. We got to find a way to help bring it back. So, but again, we all have to take responsibility. And I'm showing you from my government, I put up $1 million. I'm not just I'm walking the talk. I'm not just saying it.
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Ms. Zan, we need a motion to extend the meeting past 1 o'clock. Could I have a motion to that?
Certainly,
All
Chair,
right.
I would like to make that motion to
All
extend.
right, all in favor? I see no opposition, so we will extend, and we will now suspend as we have to set up our next panel. But I want to thank Mr. Chartrand, Mr. Benoit, Ms. McKay. I know you were slipping text notes to Dave to give him his punchlines. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much. We will now suspend for just a few
Thank you very
minutes.
much.
Thank you for allowing me on here. Thank you.
apologize for the. It's a strange thing. You can open your microphone with the space bar, but if you do another job on it, it defaults to whatever you were doing. So I was talking to nobody there, and I apologize for that. So now we all have these technical moments on Zoom, and we have our panel ready to go. Ms. Whitman, Ms. Kudlow, Ms. Sharp, and President Omenijo. Thank you for taking the time to appear. We have 6 minutes for opening statements, followed by rounds of questioning. And so I'm not sure who will open. Ms. Whitman, will you begin now for 6 minutes?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Kwekwe Walalan. My name is Lorraine Whitman, grandmother white sea turtle, and I am speaking to you today from Mi'kma'ki, the unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I would like to thank the members of this committee for asking us to appear before you to talk about Bill C-15. NWAC is the voice of the grassroots Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people in Canada, and as such, we have different perspectives to the male-led national Indigenous organizations when it comes to issues like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I am going to turn the floor over to Adam Bond, a legal counsel for NWAC, who will be going into the technical details of the bill and the UN Declaration. But before I do, I would to put on the record that considering the importance of UNDRIP and the implementations of it in Canada, we are more than disappointed at how the consultation, or I should say the lack of consultation, has occurred. Indigenous women were not meaningfully consulted. Where is the honor of the Crown? And I want to bring this to your attention because this is not an exception, but rather the norm. This must stop. UNDRIP is about us, our families, our communities. Thousands of pages of the National Inquiry testimony and its calls for justice, specifically Section 1.3, demands that government ends the political marginalization of Indigenous women. Our exclusion from this important consultation flies in the face of these demands. On saying that, I am going to ask our legal counselor, Adam Bond, to take over from here. Walalan. Adam?
Thank you, President Whitman. My name is Adam Bond. I am legal counsel with the Native Women's Association of Canada. I'm here with President Whitman in a support capacity, and I'm happy to answer and respond to any questions of a more technical nature as it relates to NWAC's interests and concerns for Bill C-15. I think that it was a very thorough discussion in the first panel, and I'm pleased to have been able to listen in and hear your questions and the responses. I think that this is a great dialogue. We're addressing some of the concerns that have been raised, and I feel that those concerns are generally gravitate towards some of the same concerns that were prevalent during the discussions on Bill C-262, particularly whether or not FPIC constitutes a veto and whether the changes brought in under Bill C-15 will essentially undo some of the jurisprudence with respect to Section 35 rights. I don't want to take up too much time here because I'm sure that these questions will be brought up shortly. So I look forward to hearing your questions and hope to have an opportunity to respond to some of these very important issues. Thank you.
So if that's the presentation, then we can go to our questions, and I appreciate that opportunity to invite our first 6-minute round of questions, starting with Mr. Viersen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's 2 more groups on the notice as well. Do they have separate presentations, or are they not here today? Just on the notice of meeting.
Mr. Clerk, are we? I may have missed.
Yeah. Because I see the Native Women's Association and then the Inuit Women of Canada and the Women of the Métis Nation.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah. President Sharp, were you going to make a presentation?
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry about that. Apologize once again. And so this will be from the Inuit women for 6 minutes. Please go ahead. And thanks, Mr. Viersen.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to join you today from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. President Kulu had connectivity challenges this morning and sends her regrets. The passage of Bill C-15 is important to all Inuit women and girls in Canada. Thank you for the invitation to appear before your committee on this legislation.
Monsieur le Président,
yes.
Je voudrais faire un appel au règlement. Monsieur le Président, l'interprète me signale que le son est très, très loin. Donc, je ne sais pas s'il y a une possibilité de rapprocher le micro. Elle est incapable, en raison du son, de faire la traduction. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Merci. Mr. Clerk?
Yes. Ms. Sharp, if you wouldn't mind bringing the microphone closer to you and speaking just a little bit more slowly and clearly, and we hope we can continue with your testimony accordingly.
Okay. I'll start again. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to join you today from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. President Kulu sends her regrets as she had connectivity challenges. The passage of Bill C-15 is important to all Inuit women and girls in Canada. Thank you for the invitation to appear before your committee on this legislation. With me today is Beth Smines, Kaututik's legal counsel. I was born in Yellowknife to David Sharp and Moatia Kichwalik. My mother is the oldest of 17 children born to Gideon Kichwalik. My grandfather, Kichwalik, helped shape Nunavut's land claims agreement, in which education and self-determination were key. He is also one of the seal hunters on the back of the 1972 $2 bill. My childhood was spent in Nova Scotia and Johaven.
Ms. Sharp, I'm sorry to have to interrupt, and I really apologize. That's remarkable testimony from your history that you're beginning, but unfortunately, to have a properly conducted meeting, it has to be clearly translatable, and so that our Francophone members can get an accurate translation. And because of the technology, not because of yourself, that's not coming through in a way that we can actually translate it. So, Mr. Clerk, I'm going to ask you to comment on whether we should move to our next speaker and then see if we can resolve the issues with Ms. Sharp.
Yes, I can have some folks reach out. But in the event that we're not able to get back to her, like with previous witnesses, it's my assumption that the committee wishes to receive speaking notes as evidence.
So the president of the Women of the Métis Nation, you heard our discussion. Can you present for 6 minutes now?
Mr. Chair, before you continue, Mr. Chair, I have a technical issue, so I'm going to have to reboot. So I'm unable to be on camera for some reason. It's not allowing me, so I will come back onto the committee in a couple of minutes.
Fine. Thank you. And now, apologies for all of this, but please go ahead once again, Ms. Alminiho.
Good afternoon, and I too thank you for the opportunity to come and present to the committee on behalf of Lefemachifo-Tepimswak, which is the Women of the Métis Nation. It's a continuing journey to ensure the equality of rights, treatment, and access to education, health, employment, justice, and democratic leadership of Métis women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people across the Métis motherland. Lefemachif is actively engaged with its grassroots constituency to exploring options of the equitable and meaningful implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in Canada. Elders and representatives from across the Métis motherland have noted that this historic piece of legislation, if implemented according to its spirit and intent, could have the transformative power of a Canadian Indigenous Bill of Rights. Bill C-15, the proposed UNDRIP Act, represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reset both the scales of justice and the balance of power, so that Indigenous women, children, and two-spirit and gender diverse people are protected, safe, and free. Accomplishing the equitable implementation of UNDRIP domestically will be no easy feat and will require a distinctions-based approach that recognizes no hierarchy of rights among First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Moreover, within each of the three distinctions-based groups, the unique experience of Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit and gender diverse people will also require specific analysis and attention given their precarious and vulnerable positions in Canadian society. Indeed, taking a distinctions-based and gender-based approach to UNDRIP implementation will help ensure equality of outcomes for all Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit and gender diverse Indigenous peoples. Accordingly, diligent implementation of the UNDRIP will demand a whole of society acknowledgement, recognition, and respect for the basic human rights and the constitutionally protected Aboriginal rights of Indigenous people of Canada, particular protections for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women, children, and two-spirit and gender diverse peoples. From LFMO's perspective, the UNDRIP Act holds up the hope and promise of equality of treatment and outcomes for all Métis women, girls, and two-spirit and gender diverse folks from our Métis motherland. LFMO is a national Indigenous women's organization that serves as a democratically elected representatives and gives a national and international voice for Métis women across the Métis motherland. LFMO is mandated to represent the economic, social, and political needs and interests and aspirations of Métis women, two-spirit and gender diverse people. LFMO acknowledges and appreciates the comments on Bill C-15 provided to the government thus far and have been incorporated into the draft legislation. We've been included in many of the engagement sessions that the Department of Justice held prior to the legislation coming into existence, and we support the process of moving the bill forward. And we're not asking for any amendments or changes to the bill. We believe that the implementation of UNDRIP is going to be only meaningful when the development of an action plan comes into being. And based on Stats Canada and the reports that we have for missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country, we think that it's imperative that the action plan be all-encompassing and support the engagement of ensuring that there is consultation and process available to help support the activities and engagement of Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited gender diverse people throughout the process. We think that employing a culturally relevant, distinctions-based and gender-based lens to the development of Bill C-15's action plan and the implementation will be critical to the Act's success. We think that to accomplish this, LFMO calls for an Indigenous first, gender-based analysis plus approach to inform the development of the action plan and the annual reporting to Parliament. National Indigenous women's organizations, regional and community Indigenous women's organizations, as well as Indigenous two-spirit and gender diverse representatives and organizations must have an equal seat at the table as other national Indigenous organizations for the implementation of Bill C-15. Anything less than the equality and representation would democratically detract from the honor and the meaning of the sense of the inherent equality contained within UNDRIP. Before colonization, many Indigenous nations were either matrilineal or matriarchal or matriarchal, with women holding important equal positions with their male counterparts. For the Métis Nation, our women were highly respected and central to functioning of our society. They held essential roles in buffalo hunting brigades, subsistence trapping and fishing, voyaging expeditions, governance, raising children, and passing down cultural, spiritual, and social knowledge. With colonization, imported Euro-Canadian notions of inequality, racism, gender norms radically transformed our society. Displacement, land dispossession, residential and day schools, and child apprehension have left Métis women marginalized and vulnerable, subject to targeted violence and negative societal attitudes. An important part of decolonization is in empowering the voices and the roles of women in two-spirit and gender diverse people in decision-making for our Métis motherland. Honorable implementation of UNDRIP requires that the process be inclusive and incorporate the perspectives and aspirations and lived experiences of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women and two-spirit people in planning and decision-making. And while male-led and male-dominated national Indigenous organizations have been canvassed and consulted at length on C15, the NIOs and the two-spirit and gender diverse representative also need to have an equal role in all planning decision-making.
We're at time, Ms. Omeniho. Are you close to concluding?
I am. In conclusion, I just would like to say I support the work of this committee, and we're hoping that Bill C15 gets to move forward and will become a bill that we can all start working on building an action plan that we can be proud of. And I thank you for this opportunity again.
And thank you for your presentation. Mr. Clerk, I'm assuming that there's still a technical issue with Ms. Sharp. And so am I understanding that we will do a continuous interpretation of her notes? If she begins to read again, let me know how we're going to handle this.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Interpretation will work off Ms. Sharp's notes, and she will give her opening statement in that way. And while I have the floor, I'll also ask everyone else in the meeting to make sure that the volume on their cellular devices is turned off, as it's disruptive to interpretation if it goes off while their mic is on.
Okay, so turn down your cells. And once again, Ms. Sharp, you've begun with such a fascinating story, but we need you to start it again, and we'll do the interpretation as you go along. So once again, please go ahead.
I'd like to say good morning and thank you. It's a pleasure to join you today from Yellowknife Northwest Territories. President Kulu had connectivity challenges this morning and sends her regrets. The passage of Bill C-15 is important to all Inuit women and girls in Canada. Thank you for the invitation to appear before your committee on this legislation. With me today is Beth Smines, Paututi's legal counsel. I was born in Yellowknife to David Sharp and Moitié Ketchwalik. My mother is the oldest of 17, born to Gideon Ketchwalik. My grandfather, Ketchwalik, helped shape the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, in which education and self-determination were key. He's also one of the seal hunters on the back of the 1972 $2 bill. My childhood was spent in Nova Scotia and Johaven, an Inuit hamlet in Nunavut. I was among one of the first Inuit women to receive facial tattoos in 60 or 70 years to strengthen my connection to my Inuit culture and identity. I worked towards the advancement of Inuit for my children and my grandchildren. Inuit women in the mining industry are an example of a larger issue of the lack of respect for the voices of Inuit women and the partnership that is needed with all members of our community for the future resource development in Inuit Nunangat and to make progress on reconciliation with Inuit. Progress with C15 will advance by supporting Inuit and project developers to find common ground. Paututik is the voice of Inuit women wherever they live in Canada. I am the Vice President of Paututik. Our board has representatives from each of the 4 regions in Inuit Nunangat, as well as representatives from urban centers and youth representatives. For 36 years, Paututik has been the national voice for the rights of Inuit women and girls working towards our health, education, economic, physical, emotional, and social security. Paututik had legal standing at the MMIWG inquiry and was at every hearing where Inuit families told their stories. Paututik and ITK are co-chairing the Inuit Working Group which is running the Inuit chapter on the MMIWG National Action Plan. Paututik is also active on the international stage on the rights of Indigenous women. Every year, Paututik participates in the sessions with the UN Commission on the Status of Women and the UN Indigenous Peoples Permanent Forum. In October 2020, Paututik was invited to 2 consultations with Sarnar and Justice on the preliminary draft of C15. As well, Paututik filed a brief asking for changes to the draft legislation. C15 incorporated many of the changes that Paututik sought. C15 is a step forward for Inuit women and all Canadians on the journey towards reconciliation. C15 is important because it states that Inuit women will have the right to participate in decision-making in matters which affect them, the right to improvement on economic and social conditions, including education, housing, health, employment, and social security, the right to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health, the same rights and freedoms guaranteed to Inuit men. As well, Inuit women are able to enforce all of their rights in the UNDRIP Act wherever they and their children live in Canada. For all of these important reasons, Paututik is not seeking any amendments to the legislation. Paututik asks members of this committee to work towards the quick passage of C15. I conclude by addressing the development of the action plan to implement UNDRIP. The action plan must be distinction-based. Gender equality is a deeply held value for all Canadians. The federal government must use a GPA plus lens to develop the action plan. The voices of all Inuit women must be heard. C15 is critical to closing the gaps for Inuit women with other women in Canada in education, culture, language, health, housing, and economic security. It is also critical to realizing the hopes and aspirations that we have for our children and our grandchildren. The passage of C15 is also a historical opportunity for Canada to advance the path of reconciliation with Inuit and other Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. Remarkable testimony. I think I can speak for our committee about the honor that we feel in having a role to play in the matters that are so important to you and your families and your people. We'll have a chance for 1 round of questioning due to time constraints, and a 6-minute round of questioning will be with Mr. Viersen, Ms. Zan, Ms. Gill, who's with us now, and Ms. Gazan. So, Arnold, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank each of the witnesses for coming here today. And despite the technical difficulties getting their testimony on the record, I very much appreciate it. And Ms. Sharp, the story about the $10 bill and your family being on that's really cool. I like that a lot. I have spent most of my time in Parliament battling against human trafficking, the scourge of human trafficking that happens here in Canada. Human trafficking is happening within 10 blocks of where most of us live. We don't necessarily see it. We know that the victims of human trafficking are typically young women between the ages of 15 and 35. And the stats of the victims that we are able to rescue from human trafficking, we don't really have a good handle on how many victims we have in this country, but the stats of the ones that we are able to help and the ones that we're able to rescue, 50% of them are First Nation, Inuit, Métis, Indigenous people from Canada. And so I want to thank each of your organizations. I know particularly the Indigenous Women's Association has been at the forefront of that battle, working with me to bring forward bill. They supported my motion M47 back in 2017, and all of your organizations. I'm sure that that's a big part of what you do around battling human trafficking. I really appreciate all of the things that you do on that. Today we're talking about C15. It's a somewhat controversial bill in the fact that unlike other areas that I work in on the human trafficking front, I use a UN document called the Palermo Protocol. It was adopted in the year 2000. It is used. Canada is a signatory to it. Canada, we use it, although not all of our laws are in line with the Palermo Protocol. I still have private members bill on the record right now to bring Canada in line with the Palermo Protocol. There's one aspect of the Palermo Protocol that Canada isn't fully aligned with yet. I also use extensively the UN document on the rights of the child. That as well is something that we use, but it again is not a Canada is a signatory to that document. However, our Canadian laws don't necessarily fully align with the aspirations of that document. And to me, it feels that the UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, is a similar document to the Palermo Protocol, the rights of the child, and UNDRIP. So I just am wondering, and probably Mr. Bond is the likely guy to take a crack at this one first. How is this different? How would legislating that UNDRIP have application in Canadian law? How is that different than the Palermo Protocol on the rights of the child, or am I just imagining that? Mr. Bond?
Thank you. It's a really important question, and I think that there is a lot of confusion about how this operates. I don't think that many people are under the assumption that Bill C-15 would elevate the UNDRIP to the extent where it would create new actionable grounds. However, what you're speaking to is its interpretation, right? This clause in clause 4 that recognizes that UNDRIP, because as a declaration, it's not binding treaty under international law. I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
And so, what the purpose of this clause would be is to say, well, for Canada, this declaration is now considered to be an international human rights instrument with application in Canada. And so what that means is that it becomes an interpretive tool under the presumption of conformity, right? And so when a charter challenge is brought, or when some action or a judicial review is brought before the courts, this would allow the courts to use UNDRIP as an interpretive tool. And the presumption of conformity is a well-established legal principle that says that the courts will work to interpret our legislation in a way that conforms with international law that is binding on Canada. And so the question is, well, what does that do? And I'm sure that one of the main concerns is the the Article 32 of UNDRIP, right? And so if we now have this UNDRIP, which is elevated to an interpretive tool, and there is Article 32, which requires that governments consult in order to obtain free, prior, informed consent before approving projects that can have adverse effects on Indigenous rights. Well, how does this fit into the legal text? right? And I wish I wish that we had more time. These are obviously complex issues, and I don't know that I'll be able to boil it down too quickly. But the Coles Notes version is essentially that, and it's not that large of an effect, right? So the existing jurisprudence that we have with respect to the duty to consult that most people refer to in the Haida Nation case still stands, right? Whether or not there is an existing claim, whether or not what the content of the duty to consult might be based off of an unresolved claim, all that jurisprudence is still relevant. And in fact, even the jurisprudence that deals with the test for justification for an infringement of a Section 35 right will still remain relevant right up until the step for justification, where the reverse onus turns to the government to justify any infringement. So, for example, if you have a proposed project and you have...
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it right there.
Right.
Appreciate it. My time is up.
Thanks, Mr. Viersen. Ms. Zan, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Willalan, and I come today from the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia, like President Whitman. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your tireless efforts on behalf of Indigenous women and girls and making sure that they have a voice in these important matters. In addition to the specific Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action 43 and 44, which call on governments to fully adopt and implement the declaration and develop an action plan to achieve its goals. The declaration is referenced throughout the calls to action, and it's also referenced in the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls. So maybe start with Ms. Whitman, but I'd like to hear from each of you regarding this final report. And can you expand on why you think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the National Inquiry both emphasize the declaration as such a key part of reconciliation, and perhaps offer some views on why this international document is so essential to advancing reconciliation here in Canada from coast to coast to coast? Ms. Whitman.
Okay. Thank you, Leanne. I appreciate the question. First of all, I'd like to go back. It's so important with the TRC as well as the National Inquiry, what has taken place. And when we look at the UNDRIP and we look at the human rights and the violence that has occurred with our women, our girls, and our gender diverse, these calls of actions are there. And the process that we're going through, we need to be able to consult the grassroots people. These are the people that we're working for. And as, a leader with NWAC, we haven't had the time or even the respect to be able to meet and consult with the people that truly count. These are the people that gave their testimonies, their stories of their heartache, of their loved one being taken away by another person, or not even knowing where they are at this time and date. So both of them work together because of all of the, the calls with the TRC, as well as the National Inquiry. It has stated at the very ending, the findings that it's a genocide. And the genocide is part of this UN. And that's why the women need to be consulted and to be able to be at the table with our men leaders. We have a different lens on what's happening. We speak to our women, our girls, and our gender diverse. And we need to be there with, the men, so that we can have a healthy community and that the women aren't marginalized as they are today, because it goes back into the history, the economics, the whole bit. So it's very important that we really look at all of these rights, and that if it's going to be true, consulting, then there should be proper consultation.
Thank you. Ms. Whitman, okay. I'm so sorry, but I need to hear from the others as well, and I have another question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Olmanijo.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. We believe that UNDRIP provides issues and a lens on human rights that really haven't been addressed. And the TRC and the and the missing and murdered report clearly identifies that there are many significant issues that require us to move forward in trying to create reconciliation and equality in this country that really haven't been addressed. And we see evidence of that in all the work that we're doing, including racism in the healthcare system, the issues that we are trying to engage with the police services, trying to change the lens on how those kinds of things are happening. So this is the UNDRIP Bill C-15 is just a cornerstone piece of legislation that will help build the foundation of a better future and more reconciliation.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but Ms. Sharp?
Ms. Symes will take the call on her behalf because of the technical issue. Ms. Symes?
Sure.
Are you there?
Needs to unmute.
Thank you. I am now unmuted. I'll try not to repeat what Mr. Bond or Ms. Omenahue has said. For Poctutic, the UNDRIP Act is a dramatic change, hopefully a dramatic change in the relationship between Canada and Inuit women, Indigenous people. It provides a new pathway forward in terms of that relationship. Now, I listened to your last Tuesday and read the transcripts of previous witnesses, and you focused very much on natural resources and free, prior and informed consent. But I ask you to take a different lens, the lens of women. And in sections 21 and 24, the UNDRIP Act promises is a commitment to an improvement in the economic and social conditions, education, housing, health, employment, and social security. That young Inuk girl right now will live 10 years less than my daughters. That's not acceptable. Not acceptable. There's a way to do things differently. And please focus as much on the social, economic, and human conditions because they're just so important.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ms. Sands.
Is that my time?
That's your time.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure that Ms. Gill and Ms. Gazan will
Yes.
build on that. Madame Gill, s'il vous plaît.
Madam Gill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses, Madam Whitman, and others. Thank you so much for talking about Bill C-15. You all talked about the GBA Plus analysis because that's what you talked about in your presentation, GBA Plus, and then also consultations. I'd like you to all share your perspectives with me regarding GBA Plus. How will this improve the bill, and how would you like to be consulted during this process? Thank you.
Ms. Whitman, you want to start?
Certainly. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to be respectfully consulted in that, that we're contacted at our national office so that we would be able to have clarifications and different questions so that we would be able to meet with our grassroots, our PTMAs, those are the president territorial members that sit on our national board. And then we would be able to go from there to meet with the grassroots, to have their input, because it's their input that's so important to hear their words, because it deals with them as well. And that's the process which we would be going to. Well, Alan, thank you.
Further, Ms. Symes, Ms. Omenijo?
I can go, Ashley. So why it's important for there to be a gender-based analysis used when we're working with Bill C-15 is that in the onset of the development of the UNDRIP within the United Nations, at that time, there was never a lot of work or process in looking at things from a gendered perspective. And I think that in the development in the work, especially in the process of implementation of the of Bill C-15, I think that we can do a better job of ensuring that there is a lens for all the intersections that make up the Indigenous community. As far as consultation, the biggest thing I want to say about consultation is very often as Indigenous women, we're an afterthought in being engaged, and we're brought in on the 11th hour and only given a very marginal opportunity to have proper engagement. I think in equal and fair process, everybody would have the same opportunity and be given the same capacity to be able to engage fully on any conversations or discussions on all matters going forward.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, let me just give you a legal foundation for what Ms. O'Manahu and Ms. Whitman have said. Article 44 of the Charter says that the rights and freedoms in the Declaration are guaranteed equally to, and I'll say, Inuit women as well as Inuit men. And that's where we must begin. And how can you guarantee those rights without hearing from them? And so we say that Inuit women must be there at the beginning as the action plan is being developed. And they've got to be there at all tables, because otherwise no GBA analysis will be done and the rights of Indigenous women will not be protected. Thank you.
Ms. Gill?
Monsieur le Président,
How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? 2 minutes? Perfect. So, I have a question, a more general question. You talked about the history of women, of Métis women, of First Nations and Inuit women, and the history of colonization that was horrible for women specifically. How will C-15, I know there aren't any solutions for what happened, but how will it help with reconciliation? How will it be able to help women? I would like to know what you would like to highlight specifically as what could help women. And my question is for everyone, of course, again, so you can choose who wants to speak first.
Ms. Whitman, why don't you go for 1 minute and we'll...
Thank you. You know, first of all, when we look at Bill C-15, you know, it's like any piece of legislation. It's not perfect, but in this case, however, perfection is not simple. You know, the enemy of the good, I guess you could say, demanding perfection of the bill of C-15 operates directly against the rights and the interest of the Indigenous women and girls who have every right to be as free and from violence and discrimination as you or any other woman would love. And that's why we're saying that we need to be there. We don't want to be just a token of being a woman or an afterthought, which has happened and occurred. And I feel, you know, if the respect is truly there, I can certainly appreciate that we would be able to go much further than what we're going, and moving forward in, you know, in a way that our women, our girls, and our gender diverse people will be appreciated and respected, because we are a large marginalized group of women that, you know, are dealing with the violence.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Ms. Gazan, thanks, Ms. Gill. Ms. Gazan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You know, many of you have spoke about the marginalization of women's and diverse gendered voices in even in Bill C-15. That's certainly what I've heard. And And I would agree that there has been a clear lack of representation of Indigenous women's voices during the consultation of C-15. So my question first is for Madame Omani or Omaniho? Omaniho, is that okay? How do you think this can be improved moving forward?
Okay, I've got an easy answer to that. There can be no real reconciliation around our Indigenous population and the work that we do, including with Bill C-15, unless Indigenous women, girls, children, and 2S LGBT are included in the conversations and the consultation. We make up the majority of the Indigenous community, and we have to be a part of all conversations because we see things from another perspective. And one of the things that I've been taught is that when you resource and support women, you resource and support a community. When you resource an infrastructure and those other mechanisms, you only resource a few. So I think that we need to support women and the 2S LGBT being involved. Thank you
so much. My next question is for Madame Whitman. So the federal government, as you know, recognizes AFN, ITK, and the Métis National Council as national organization to consult on important matters. Should there be an equivalent for Indigenous women's organizations, and why?
Yes, I certainly do believe that there should be equality in there. As the NWAC, we represent, we advocate, and we defend the rights of the Indigenous, the Métis, and the Inuit. And the women that are part of our membership, they choose who they'd like to be part of. So with this, we do the best that we can to be able to advocate for them. And I feel that we should be at the tables because we are there supporting and defending the women. And these are their voices that we're speaking and bringing forth. And also with the National Inquiry, the TRC, we're bringing the voices that the women want us to bring forth at the table. And we can't do well without our voices there.
I would agree with you. Silencing is not a good way to engage, for sure. My last question is for Madame Symes. Is it Symes? Am I pronouncing it right? Legal counsel?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry, I just want to make sure. So I just want to ask something specific to Article 22 of the UN Declaration, which states the following. 1, particular attention shall be paid to the rights and special interest needs of Indigenous elders, women, youth, children, and persons with disabilities in the implementation of this declaration. And Article 22.2 states, indicates states shall take all measures in conjunction with Indigenous peoples to ensure that Indigenous women and children enjoy the full protection and guarantees against all forms of violence and discrimination. A vile human rights violation we see occurring in Canada, where we have currently over 5,000 murdered and missing Indigenous women with little or no action from the federal government. And this was noted as an act of genocide, as you know, and resulting from human rights violations in the inquiry. A key call to justice that came out of the inquiry is to ensure the full adoption and implementation of the United Nations Declaration into Canadian law. Why is this so critical? Why is this so critical? And if you could focus your response, I know you can't read the article separately, but specifically to women and in uplifting the rights of Indigenous women, girls, and diverse gendered.
Yes, thank you for the question. The UN Declaration has the social and safety and security clearly in it, in Articles 18, 21, 22, etc. And that these now, when they become law, are enshrined in Canadian law. And it's much easier for judges, for tribunal members, and for public servants, and for people like you to say, well, it's now Canadian law. And we must We must achieve these, not merely as aspirational, but these are real rights. And I picked the age limit, the lifetime, just as an example, because it shows so graphically the enormous gap between what Canadians enjoy and what Indigenous Canadians enjoy. And it's a gap that's unacceptable. It's a gap that is caused by lack of housing, by lack of policing, by lack of education, economic, and all of these things, as in a Canadian statute, will make them much more effective, much more compelling.
Just a very quick follow-up, would you say that a violation of these rights, basic human rights, housing, access to clean drinking water, is directly correlated to the epidemic of violence and murder of Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit in this country?
Absolutely. We were at the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and called evidence to show that the lack of housing, the lack of healthcare, the lack of policing are all significantly increase the risk of missing and murdered Inuit women and girls, who are 14 times more likely to be murdered than non-Indigenous. Yes, absolutely. They are all, the social determinants of health are all key to keeping Indigenous women, Inuit women safe, secure, and healthy.
Do I have time? Oh,
well,
am I time? Oh, sorry.
We're out of time, and I apologize for that. And I should apologize for the colonialization that, when it came from Europe, diminished and almost eliminated the voices of women, which traditionally had equality and autonomy among the First Nations at the time. But perhaps our work will resolve that. And I want to thank all of our witnesses so much. Sorry about the technical aspects, but we had an amazing group of people and testimonies, and are much appreciated. And with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Ms. Kazan, could you give me that motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I move a motion to adjourn.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you once again.